Hello, you're watching Midday Report. I'm Janusz Rawiński. A radical US turnaround on Europe and Ukraine. The Trump administration's official national security strategy, published on Friday, vows support for patriotic European parties that want to weaken the European Union. The long-expected document says the United States is seeking a quick end to the war in Ukraine to mitigate the risk of the conflict escalating into a Russia-Europe confrontation.
The National Security Strategy is an official U.S. document highlighting its global security and foreign policy priorities. The current version codifies President Trump's America First approach and justifies his reversals of decades of U.S. policy towards Europe and the world. The document says that America's post-Cold War strategy of promoting free trade and globalization has fallen short by allowing allies and partners in Europe and Asia to take advantage of American economic and military power. In the section on Europe, the document argues that the continent's falling share of the world economy is less of a problem than what it calls a stark prospect of civilizational erasure that it blames on the European Union. The strategy accuses unnamed European governments of holding unrealistic expectations when it comes to ending the war in Ukraine, arguing without providing evidence that these governments do not enjoy majority support in their own countries. In a reference to the Eurosceptic, anti-mainstream and often pro-Russian parties in Europe, the strategy says America wants them to press on and is optimistic about the growing influence of what it calls patriotic European parties. The strategy also claims that some NATO members will become majority non-European and, in an apparent bow to Moscow, says the alliance's open-door policy should turn into a pledge not to expand further.
In an interview for TVP World, Jarosław Ćwiek-Karpowicz, director of the Polish Institute of International Affairs, commented on the strategy and on its implications.
There are, of course, many interesting points regarding U.S. foreign and security policy or some indications what should be done in the next years. But about Europe, from one hand, for U.S., Europe still is perceived as a very important place to make a business, and especially Central and Central Europe, including Poland. It means that the U.S. accepts the current situation, the NATO, the existence of NATO, and U.S. has its interest to have very strong relations with these countries. Mm-hmm. On the other hand, still in the U.S. administration, there is a belief that Russia is a threat for Europe, but not for U.S. itself. For U.S. itself, it's China. So that's why they really would like to make so-called strategic stability. It means that Russia should not be completely dependent on China and enlarge this, let's say, Chinese bloc. I have no reservation to this position. Mm-hmm. It's rather a positive signal for Europeans, mm-hmm. especially from Central Europe, to invest in our ties, economic, cultural, political ties with United States.
And joining us now to discuss this potentially groundbreaking document is Adam Yasser, news director here on TVP World. Hello and welcome.
Hello, thank you.
So the Trump administration says Europe is valuable, but also Europe needs to change. What kind of vision of Europe do they present in this document?
I think you put your finger on it because it's a contradiction. On the one hand, this document says we want strong Europe as a partner, but then it actually advocates for fragmentation of Europe and less cohesion inside Europe.
They call it European greatness.
Yeah, exactly. They're calling it European greatness, but at the same time they're saying in that explicitly that they prefer nation states in Europe and division. So, Europe has exercised division for centuries, and it always ended in wars, including 2 wars in which the United States eventually had to take part on the European continent. So there is contradiction, but there's also, I think, more importantly, there is quite visible antagonism towards the European Union as such.
Is it simply because of economic reasons, or is there anything else to it?
Could be the economy. It could be the result of Trump's, to a certain degree, justified approach that the Europeans, particularly Western Europeans, were free-riding for a very long time, taking American backing, economic and military primarily, for granted, and not contributing enough to, let's say, common security in Europe. So, in a sense, we see some reflections of that attitude in this document, that Europe should take greater responsibility for its defense, for its security. But this document goes further than that, because it actually implies that the European Union as such is a construct that actually limits European power, which is a contradiction.
And they also say that there is a cultural decline in Europe, and it seems like they want to curate a reversal of this process, including by promoting certain political parties and not others.
Well, you know, the Trump administration's sympathy for some Eurosceptic, anti-mainstream, and also sometimes pro-Russian parties has been explicit. I mean, J.D. Vance, Elon Musk and others have, for example, lauded the AfD, the Alternative for Germany party, which is, you know, anti-EU, anti-Poland, anti-Western alliance, anti-NATO. And suddenly Trump is talking about these people as allies. Again, a contradiction.
A contradiction, do you think this is because they don't realize that their stated objective, Europe standing on its own feet without being dominated by any adversarial power, this might actually fail if they have parties that are aligned with one of these powers?
I think it's a Freudian slip. So in a sense, they're saying we don't want external powers to be influential over Europe except us. And for us, it's a divide and conquer strategy. So if Europe is divided again into smaller countries, because this strategy also says something which is true. Europe is losing relevance when it comes to economic power in the world because of Asia primarily. The rise of Asia is obvious, India, China, but also other countries in that region. So Europe's relative economic power is shrinking. So Trump is saying yes, but then he says this is not the main problem. You need to fragment more and then you will regain that power. That's a paradox.
So what about NATO? It says that, you know, the alliance shouldn't be perpetually expanding. So this is bad for Ukraine. But what about the European dimension? What about countries such as Poland, which are concerned about possible Russian aggression at some point in the future, for example?
Well, we've seen in recent days that, recent weeks, that the ambiguity of US approach to NATO and the eastern flank is there. And now it's codified in this document because this is a departure from a long tradition of keeping NATO's door open to candidates who meet the criteria. Obviously, the criteria are very strict, and it's not so easy to get into the alliance. But they are there, and there's an open door policy. Whereas Trump is sort of following the Russian narrative that whatever security arrangements come out of the current war in Ukraine, NATO has to pledge no expansion policy, implying Ukraine, but also Moldova, whoever else.
Does it mean that there is any weakening of America's pledge to protect countries of Central and Eastern Europe, which are explicitly mentioned here as so-called healthy countries that the US wants to do business with and cultivate their rise?
It sounds nice, but in my view, this is a messaging that Central Europe should join this project of dismantling the European Union. It doesn't implicitly say we want to weaken NATO on the eastern flank, but I think the consequences of European turmoil, if there was one, will clearly affect the cohesion of NATO. I mean, these are the same countries effectively. So, you know, it's just interesting how the US sees this play out. If their scenario of weakening the European Union is implemented by those parties that they favor, the question what comes then is left open.
Adam Yasser, News Director here on TVP World. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Two continents, two visions of peace. In Beijing, Xi Jinping and Emmanuel Macron called for calm in Ukraine, while Vladimir Putin stepped onto a red carpet in New Delhi, as Narendra Modi welcomed him with notable warmth. But despite claims of progress towards peace, the two meetings display significant differences in terms of direction.
Xi Jinping and Emmanuel Macron have issued a joint call for a ceasefire in Ukraine, a rare moment of diplomatic convergence between Beijing and Paris, as Europe searches for a way out of a dwindling war. In Beijing, Macron urged China to use its influence, while Xi insisted China would play a constructive role in its own way.
President Xi took into account the arguments I was making, which I cited for the Europeans, about having a robust and lasting peace. That is, ensuring that there are elements that guarantee Ukraine will not be subjected to further aggression. And so, yes, we made progress, and we agreed that our foreign ministers will engage in strengthened dialogue in the coming weeks.
The meeting unfolded against reports that Chinese components continue to fuel Russia's drone industry, an uncomfortable backdrop to any talk of peace.
Merci beaucoup.
But as France and China discussed peace, another diplomatic axis stirred in New Delhi. Narenda Modi rolled out a full ceremonial welcome for Vladimir Putin, his first trip to India in 4 years, signaling that India's balancing act between Russia and the West is very much alive.
Delighted to welcome my friend President Putin to India. Looking forward to our interactions later this evening and tomorrow. India-Russian friendship is a time-tested one that has greatly benefited our people.
Modi told Putin that India is, quote, not neutral. It stands on the side of peace and backs any credible effort to end the war in Ukraine. Putin in turn thanked India for its attention and efforts towards negotiations and promised uninterrupted fuel supplies. Russia remains India's top arms provider, and both leaders want to push trade towards $100 billion by 2030, even as New Delhi faces tariff pressure from Washington over its Russian oil imports. For Europe, India's strategic positioning matters, especially as Brussels tries to engage Delhi more closely.
We do hope also for a big hug from Prime Minister Modi when the Ursula von der Leyen will come to Delhi, and just to show us the balance between the warmness of relations between Russia and the European Union, so that this balancing act would also convince us that Prime Minister Modi thinks not only about his domestic agenda and development.
Two capitals, two diplomatic tracks, one calling for a ceasefire, another keeping old alliances warm. And as these leaders maneuver, the search for a path to peace in Ukraine remains as elusive as ever.
Russia is more aggressive than the Soviet Union in the 1970s, said Polish Foreign Minister Radosław Sikorski during the OSCE Ministerial Council in Vienna on Thursday. The OSCE chairperson in office believes the organization could play a bigger role in the war in Ukraine, but only after introducing changes. This, however, seems impossible due to Moscow's obstruction of every important decision.
Russian participation in the OSCE is highly contentious and strained due to the country's ongoing aggression against Ukraine and its hybrid warfare campaign against Europe, both of which are grave violations of the organization's fundamental principles.
Today's Russia is more aggressive than the Soviet Union was in the 1970s. Moscow is drifting away from democracy towards totalitarianism, away from coexistence towards aggression.
Polish Foreign Minister Radosław Sikorski made the remarks at Thursday's meeting of OSCE foreign ministers in Vienna, an annual gathering Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov decided to skip, sending his deputy to helm the Russian delegation instead.
I think it tells what Russians are thinking, really, not believing in multilateralism and not being able to really listen to what the rest of the world has to say about them violating the international law.
Sikorski said he's pleased Moscow's representatives heard what other countries had to say about Russia. Commenting on the organization's role in the war in Ukraine, the Polish foreign minister said the organization could monitor a future Russia-Ukraine ceasefire, but only if Moscow realizes that it cannot spend more on weapons than the West.
The OSCE could help in the future when today's Russia reaches the same conclusion as the Soviet Union, namely that they cannot spend more on defense than the West, and therefore arms control and confidence-building measures would benefit them.
The US believes the OSCE could play a meaningful role, but only after it introduces reforms that include engaging Russia in serious conflict management. If not, the organization could face potential American withdrawal.
The US has adopted Russia's position that the OSCE should stop promoting democracy and human rights, foster dialogue with a wartime aggressor, and cut staff and programs that make a real difference. This is the exact opposite of what we once stood for.
Finnish Foreign Minister and current OSCE chairperson in office, Elina Valtonen, says reforms are needed to boost the organization's relevance and effectiveness, especially in light of the war in Ukraine. But potential changes are hard to introduce when Moscow often blocks consensus on critical decisions, paralyzing the functions of the entire organization. The Finnish OSCE chairmanship is slowly coming to an end, and it will now be Switzerland's turn to lead the organization's path on how to act and react to Russian aggression.
The Warsaw Central Railway Station is celebrating its 50th birthday today. In the 5 decades since its opening, the station has served over 1 billion passengers. Ovidiusz Nicieja has more.
This is the Warsaw Central Railway Station, and this iconic modernist building in the heart of the Polish capital is celebrating its 50th birthday. The station was opened on December 5th, 1975.
Świętujemy dzisiaj.
We are celebrating 50 years of the Warsaw Central Station, a symbolic location that many Poles have either already been to or will visit at some point. It's been half a century of history, meetings, and journeys. The station stands as a witness to a lot of Polish history.
The Central Station in Warsaw was a flagship project of communist Poland, and many of the modern technological solutions used here were surprising and inspired awe in the citizens of a republic behind the Iron Curtain. And even though now these solutions are nothing unusual to modern-day Poles, the station has maintained its iconic status.
When it was built, it was the most modern train station in Europe, with a bold architectural design and a futuristic vision, distinctive roof, wide hallways. It quickly became part of the capital's landscape. But it was not concrete and steel that created the legend of this place, but the millions of passengers that passed through it. Construction work on the station proceeded at an impressive pace, and it was completed in just 1,100 days, even though the original schedule estimated that it would take 10 years. Frankly speaking, after these 50 years, we are working to ensure that we operate at the same pace as our predecessors did 50 years ago.
In the past 50 years, many journeys began and ended at the Warsaw Central Railway Station. But this is not the end of the tracks, and many more are yet to come. From Warsaw for TVP World, Ovidiusz Nicieja.
Now, classic car ownership comes with many challenges, and it's generally a bit of a strain on your funds. One Welsh pensioner, is celebrating a rust to riches story after buying an Aston Martin, just like the famous James Bond car, for around £900 back in 1973. It was later left to rot in his driveway for decades. But now it's been fully restored, and experts estimate the car is worth around £1 million.
It's one of the most well-known cars in the world, James Bond's Aston Martin DB5, equipped with a wealth of gadgets, revolving number plates for disguise, pop-out gun barrels behind the lights, a bullet shield for protection during chases. Driven in the hit 1964 film Goldfinger, it was as much of a star as Sean Connery, capturing the hearts and minds of car fans across the world. So much so that one boy from Wales made up his mind to own one of the iconic vehicles. And in 1973, at the height of the UK fuel crisis, after saving every penny he could, at the age of just 19, tractor driver and council worker John Williams bought one.
Heated rear window, 5-speed box, etc. Many bills. £9.85.
For years, he used it as his daily form of transport, to and from work as part of a council road crew.
Family and responsibilities happened, and I'm afraid it stayed on the driveway for about 40 years in disrepair.
But then, life took over. One mechanic told them the Titanic was probably in a better condition. But now, nearly 50 years on, Williams and his wife have worked with a classic car company to painstakingly restore the DB5 to its original glory.
Oh, look at that.
Williams revealed that he had had offers to buy the car when it was a wreck.
I'd had offers to buy it, and times when I could have done with the money. But I resisted because, well, as Sue said to me, you know, you'll never get another one.
And those decades of waiting have paid off. Not only does it look stunning, the car's rarity means it is now worth around £1 million.
And that's all for now. Thank you for watching, and please stay with us here on TVP World.